Welcome back to the Fantasy Trading Room podcast, hosted by Faceoff Sports Network. I'm here with Chris from Fantasy Endgame. Happy to have you on. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time now. It's super lonely doing these rankings and buy lows all by myself. So it's a busy time of the season. I get it, but I'm so glad to finally have you on, Chris.
Well, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. Happy to be here and happy to talk fantasy football. Can't get enough of it. So let's go.
Yeah, right. No, the season's been absolutely crazy so far. I mean, before we dive into it, is there anything you just want to talk about? Initial reactions of the first few weeks of the season? I know this is definitely the busiest time for creators like you and me. So is there anything that's really stood out to you about the first few weeks of the season so far?
I mean, I think the biggest thing that has stood out so far is just we're already just decimated at the running back position, and it's only been 2 weeks. I mean, it just feels like if you have a halfway decent running back, it's like you have an advantage over everybody right now. So just, man, it's only going to get worse too. That's the crazy thing.
100%. Yeah, I'm a Nick Chubb owner in most of my ESPN and Dynasty leagues. So this has been an extremely rough time. In one of my main money leagues, I had J.K. Dobbins and Nick Chubb. So send out some prayers for me.
Yeah.
It's a rough time. It's been crazy. You know, you have all the running back negotiations, and running backs get injured, but I feel like it's never been this bad. And then I feel like you kind of have like all these receivers going crazy. I mean, we'll talk about him later, but Puka Ngata comes out of nowhere and he's relevant than almost half of these first round running backs. Austin Eckler's getting injured. Chubb's getting injured. I mean, it's just crazy. Like, I think the thing that is crazy to me is we spend all this time in the offseason putting out rankings, making predictions, and then who's going to predict that Puka Ngata is 10 times more valuable than half of these running backs by the time we get into week 3, right?
Yeah, that's fantasy football for you. That's football for you. It's definitely been like we get injuries like this every year, but it feels like they're coming really quick this year. So, I mean, hopefully we get lucky and Saquon comes back, Eckler comes back, and the rest of the year is okay. But yeah, we'll see.
100%. I mean, before we get into it, do you prefer this time of the season, I assume? And what is your content schedule? What is your main thing to focus on right now with the season starting back up then?
Well, yeah, for our content schedule, it's just crazy. We do 9 videos a week, plus we go live every day but Friday. Although we do go live Friday, but it's only for our members, so it's not public. So we go live Saturday. We go live Sunday morning before the games. It's crazy, but I mean, I love it. So, during the, by the end of the year, you're kind of like, oh man, I'm like ready for a break. But then after like a week or two of the off season, you're like, okay, I don't bring it back, right? So just trying to savor every week and every moment. Cause I mean, you can talk about fantasy football, man. It's great.
But yeah, let's just dive into some buy low, sell highs, or even holds at this point. Let's start off first. We kind of touched on Nick Chubb, Jerome Ford. Kareem Hunt just signed with the Browns. This is an ugly situation, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on Jerome Ford right now?
I like Jerome Ford. I think he's a good player. He was one of my favorite like late round sleepers. We talked about him multiple times this offseason as like a guy you should draft at the end of your drafts. I think he's a good player. I thought he looked great in that game against the Steelers. If you go back and watch, the Steelers were getting a ton of penetration. He was almost all the times he was going forward, creating yards. Obviously had that big run. People are like, well, he had one big run. It's like, yeah, he had one big run. But also if you watch that run was designed to go to the right. It was completely stuffed by the Steelers. He bounced it back to the left and turned. It wasn't like that was one of those runs where it's like all blocking. It was all him, really. He had another really nice 10-yard run where it was like, looked like a 7 or 8 yard loss. He turned it into a 10-yard run. I think he's a good player. He catches passes. The Browns obviously liked him because they let Kareem Hunt walk and kept him. Look, Kareem Hunt made sense in this because he knows the offense. He knows the coaches. He's you can sign him right now and he's ready to go. But he wasn't very good last year. I don't think he's going to have much of a role. I think this is Ford's backfield. So for me, Ford's a hold. I mean, if you could sell him high, do it. Anytime you can take a guy you just got off waivers, and sell him for a proven stud, maybe like an A.J. Brown, who people aren't, are worried about right now because he's been outscored 2 weeks in a row by Devonta Smith. Like, do it. I mean, obviously do it. But outside of that, I think he's a stronghold. I think he's going to be great. We love the offense for running backs. We love the offensive line. I think he's a good player. I'm mostly holding Jerome Ford if I have him.
Yeah, I agree. I think one good point you made about talking about Ford was it's just the people that say things like, "Oh, if you take away a 70-yard run, he didn't have a good game." It's like, well, if you take away the one good thing that makes a player a good player, obviously that's gonna drop them down. It's like you have to take into account that since he's a good player, he has a high chance to make those runs happen on a weekly basis. So I think I totally agree with you. He looked pretty good. And keep in mind, he had about 25 fantasy points, and Nick Chubb, it's not like he was injured on the first play of the game. He was the starting running back going up until, I believe it was about the second quarter. So
yeah.
I agree. I think I have him in some of my leagues. I'm holding him because it's not looking like anyone's going to pay up. People are a little too optimistic about Kareem Hunt, which will transition into our next player. We do have Kareem Hunt. If he's been a big waiver wire pickup as well, people are like, oh, I didn't get Jerome Ford, Kareem Hunt. He used to be a great player. Even though he wasn't that good last year, it's still possible that it could be his lead backfield. So what are your thoughts on Kareem Hunt?
Kareem Hunt for sure would be a sell high for me. Sell high. I mean, he was terrible last year, ranked outside the top 30 and outside the top 50 or 60 in pretty much every metric that looks at how good a running back was last year. And remember, he's playing behind the same offensive line, the same great offensive line as Nick Chubb in the same great run scheme. It's not like when Nick Chubb was out there, they blocked well, and then when Kareem Hunt came in, they're like, oh, we don't need to block anymore. No, he had the same opportunities as Chubb, and he was terrible last year. And you look at it down the stretch, a lot of people were really high on Nick Chubb this year because Kareem Hunt didn't come back. But you look at it down the stretch, he was only playing like 30% of the snaps. I mean, they were barely playing him because he was bad, which is also why they didn't bring him back, because he was bad. So, look, again, he knows the offense. He knows the system. He knows the coaches. It's an easy, okay, sign him. He can come in. He can give Jerome Ford a breather. He knows the plays. We don't have to, it's not going to take a 2 or 3 week transition for him to get ready. So it made sense. But if you can sell Kareem Hunt high right now, absolutely do it. I just really don't think we're going to see anything more from Kareem Hunt this year than we saw last year.
100%. I totally agree. I'm selling him for basically anything I can get right now. If I can turn a waiver wire pickup like Kareem Hunt into a usable running back that's not Hunt or wide receiver, I'm 100% doing it. I mean, people are kind of overlooking the fact that I've seen a lot of people talk about how it's like they're bringing him for $4 million. No, he has $4 million up in incentives. That does not mean the same thing. It's just that if somehow Hunt is what he used to be and they end up playing him a lot, he's has a chance to make a lot of money because it'll be super unfair to bring him in on a very short deal. He proves himself and then he doesn't get paid at all. So I think that's worth noting. But like they said, I mean, the Browns said that Ford is going to be the feature back and they're exploring possibilities to bring in. Like you said, Hunt knows the system. Super easy. Bring him back in. And Jerome Ford can't play. It's not looking like he's going to play every single down. So they kind of need someone to split the backfield with him to an extent. So what are your thoughts on Kyron Williams?
Yeah, Kyron's a little tougher because he's not, if you look at him just as a runner and as a player this year, he hasn't really been that great. His efficiency has not been good. I think he's averaging 3.6 yards per carry, hasn't run the ball well. He's not really built to be a workhorse running back, right? He's not like a big 215, 220 type guy. Not an overly fast guy, right? Didn't run a blazing 40. In fact, I think he ran a very slow 40. But he's getting all the run, right? He's getting all the run. He's catching passes. I think, though, people are kind of overinflating his value right now because he has 4 touchdowns through 2 games. So unless you think he's scoring 34 touchdowns this year and he's going to continue to score 2 touchdowns every game, we're probably pretty close to his peak value. Also, it's hard for me to believe the Rams are just going to give Kyron, every single touch from now until the end of the season and can't even hold up. Like we've seen guys in the past after Akers tore his Achilles, we saw a guy like Darrell Henderson, who's an okay running back, dominate this backfield. But then as the season goes on and his efficiency isn't very good, we see other guys getting worked into the mix. We saw Sony Michel, right? They went out, traded for him. They started working him into the mix. I'm not like 100% sold that this is just going to be like Kyron Williams workhorse from now until the end of the season. So, but certainly the path is there. So he's not a guy I feel like I have to sell high right now, but if I get a good offer, I'd be open to selling him high, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I like Williams personally. I mean, he had in 80 snaps, he had 76 of them.
Yeah.
Ronnie Rivers had 4, and he's being used on every single passing down. He had 10 targets last game. And I'm not saying you have to go out and buy him because he isn't a fantastic talent. Again, I think it's likely that this will go down now that Akers is officially out of LA. But I think the Rams are a lot better than people give him credit for. Matthew Stafford is old. He's not exciting, but he's looked pretty solid. And Cooper Kupp should hopefully be coming back and elevate this offense even more. Again, I don't think it's possible that he's going to score 34 touchdowns. So
Right.
if someone is going to value him like that, then yeah, of course, go sell him for a legitimate RB1 for maybe like, I don't know, Joe Mixon, someone like that caliber once the running backs actually decide to stop getting injured and play again. But I don't mind him. So what do you think about Josh Jacobs as a running back? He's had a rough start to the season so far.
Josh Jacobs right now is one of my favorite buy lows, and I'm not even a big Josh Jacobs guy, but he's still getting the opportunity. I mean, I know last game he only had 9 carries, but kind of got game scripted out. But he has 9? I believe he has 9 receptions through the first 2 games, 7 or 9 receptions. He got like 19 carries in that first game. He's just had 2 brutal matchups to start the season. He has another tough one this week against the Steelers. Then he gets the Chargers in week 4. Plus, he didn't play all of training camp, so he's probably rusty. I think Josh Jacobs is one of the few true RB1s that somebody would be willing to trade right now because nobody's trading CMC. Nobody's trading Bijan. People probably aren't trading Eckler. They're probably not trading Barkley unless they're desperate. Jonathan Taylor's on the pup. They're probably not trading Tony Pollard. Nick Chubb's gone. Derrick Henry, maybe. But I think Jacobs is like the one true RB1 that you could actually potentially go get right now because he's been terrible to start the year. He's been terrible in real life and in fantasy, and people are worried, but he's still a good runner. He's still getting the usage you want to see. Better days have to be ahead for him. I mean, they almost have to be ahead for him. So for me, he's one of my favorite, not just running back buy lows, but buy lows in all of fantasy.
Totally agree. I think especially with how the position's looking right now, like you said, you're not really able to access any of those other top guys. So if you have the opportunity to go and get an RB1 at this cost, I think you kind of got to go do it. What are you thinking about Puka Ngata? The waiver wire darling of the year. And he's just looked absolutely phenomenal throughout the season. 35 targets in 2 games. Even without Cooper Kupp, what are you thinking about Ngata for the next 2 games? And what do you think his role is going to be even when Kupp comes back?
Well, I'll start with his role with Kupp because I think that will help lead into like my thoughts on him right now. He'll still have a role when Kupp comes back. I mean, he's earned it, right? And he's looked good enough. But like, I have a hard time believing that Cooper Kupp is going to come back and not just be the number 1 high target on this offense. Because as good as Puka Ngata has been, he's nowhere near as good as Cooper Kupp is. He's played 2 NFL games. Cooper Kupp is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. Like if Justin Jefferson wasn't playing right now and Jordan Addison was lighting it up, would people really think Justin Jefferson was going to be behind Jordan Addison when he came back? No. Cooper Kupp is right there with Justin Jefferson as far as one of the best wide receivers in the game. He's going to be the primary target when he comes back. But Puka will still be involved, and the way this team is throwing the ball and the way this offensive line is playing, that's what's really impressed me. This offensive line is giving Stafford time. There's going to be enough here for Puka, but he's probably going to be more like a wide receiver 2 type, whereas right now people are viewing him not only as a wide receiver 1, like a top 10, maybe a top 5 wide receiver. So, I'm not saying he's a guy like you have to sell him. Like Kareem Hunt is a guy, if you have Kareem Hunt, I'm telling everybody, Kareem Hunt's available. Who wants him? Puka's a guy, if I get a really good offer for him, I will move off him right now because I do think his value will take a hit to some degree when Kupp comes back. And I think people are valuing him like a league winner right now, which means you could probably we've had like on our live streams, we've had some crazy people, like people ask us like some crazy trades for Puka where it's like, Puka and I get, Tony Pollard, or Puka and I get, AJ Brown and Joe Mixon, or AJ Brown and Kenneth Walker. Just crazy Puka trade. So if you can sell Puka right now, I think you should.
Yeah, honestly, he's a sell for me. I think he's going to have a Robert Woods type role once he comes back, but it's not anywhere near what his value is right now. So if you can't afford to sell him, say you're 2-0, I would definitely be going out and shopping him for an elite type player. But let's talk about one of the more controversial players the offseason, Calvin Ridley. What do you think about Ridley? And he had a great week 1. I was a Ridley hater this offseason, I'll admit it, and he made me look like an absolute idiot week 1. I was like, oh my God, Ridley is going to lose me a ton of leagues and money. But week 2, he kind of had a disappointing performance. I'm not really sure too much how to look into that. So what are your thoughts on Ridley for the rest of the season?
I like Ridley. I think he'll be good. He's a good player. He's in a good offense. The Jags offense hasn't really gotten off to the start I expected. I expected them to be better. I think they will be better. But he's in an offense with, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram. It's not like he's not going to be one of these guys where every week it's going to be the Calvin Ridley week. I view him kind of similarly to AJ Brown, where there's going to be some weeks where Christian Kirk goes off like he did last week, and there's going to be some weeks where Calvin Ridley goes off like he did in week 1. And then there might be some weeks where both of them struggle, or some weeks where both of them go off. So I still like Calvin Ridley. I think if you could buy low on him, I would. I don't know if you could sell high on him right now. I don't know if people are quite as excited about him as they were after week 1. Like if you were going to sell high, it was probably after week 1 when everybody thought he was a league winner already. But I think Calvin Ridley for me is probably just more of a hold.
Yeah, I think if you can get anyone that thinks he's spooked by a tough week 2, I would buy him. I think Trevor Lawrence, I don't think he's going to be that. People are saying he's going to go in that Joe Burrow type tier of performance this year. Now, Joe Burrow has looked very bad, so I don't know if that's the best example, but what we thought Joe Burrow would be, I don't think he'll reach that tier quite yet, but he's definitely has a lot of better days ahead of him than what he's seen so far. So you mentioned AJ Brown, and let's just transition into these wide receiver rankings. And I'll basically pull up where I have AJ Brown and also Garrett Wilson ranked. And so I have AJ Brown at wide receiver 9 and Garrett Wilson as wide receiver 22. Now these are pretty low compared to the start of the season. Would you be buying either of these guys low or selling them? And do you think this is a fair ranking based on what we've seen so far in their situations?
Yeah, I'll start with AJ Brown. He's right there with Josh Jacobs as one of my favorite buy lows. People are really worried because there was some talk, like there was a decent amount of people who already thought this year Devonta Smith would outscore AJ Brown. And look, Devonta Smith might outscore AJ Brown, but it's not like Devonta Smith, in my opinion, is going to significantly outscore AJ Brown. They're both going to have very good weeks. Maybe not always the same week, but they're going. I mean, and you look at that week 2 game, he had a touchdown called back on a hold. Rashad Penny held that guy in the backfield. He had another touchdown where the DB basically tackled him. Should have been DPI, but they didn't call it. If he scores those 2 touchdowns, nobody is panicking on AJ Brown right now. In fact, they're like not trading him, right? So I think AJ Brown's a great buy low. We know the kind of player he is. We know the offense he's in. He's going to be great. I think 9 is probably fair. I think I might have him ahead of like Adams and Keenan rest of the season, but other than that, I think that's pretty fair. As far as Garrett Wilson, he's a strong sell for me. He's one of my, like, even more than Puka. People don't like, because he's got a touchdown in week 1. He saved his day with a touchdown. Then he had that long touchdown run last week. But you're really banking on that every single game, because you look at it last week, only 2 catches. Zach Wilson right now, Garrett Wilson's catchable target rate with Zach Wilson right now is 43%. Like, that's worse than Marcus Mariota was for Drake London last year. And you can't bank on that 68-yard catch and run. Like, Garrett Wilson's a great player. Like, I love Garrett Wilson this year. We were telling everybody, first-round pick, he's got Aaron Rodgers. Well, unfortunately, he only had Aaron Rodgers for 4 snaps. So Zach Wilson, it's just hard to see a path for Garrett Wilson, even being a wide receiver too, to be honest. And he still has value right now because he's scoring fantasy points. He's got the name recognition. I would 100% be trying to trade him right now. And I got to be honest, I would have him ranked below. I would definitely have him ranked below Nico Collins. Nico Collins looks great, and this offense is just throwing the ball at a ridiculous pace. Maybe Chris Godwin is close for me, but I would definitely have him below Nico right now.
Yeah, that's not ridiculous to say that. I think I still am holding out some hope that he's just taken that truly elite next step to where he can overcome it. But like you said, I've been called an idiot for having Garrett Wilson even this low. People are like, how do you have Garrett Wilson behind Mike Evans? It's because people forget that last season, Garrett Wilson only had a phenomenal year without Zach Wilson. He was averaging around 8 points per game with Zach Wilson in 8 games. And, I mean, he's had a few chunk plays that has kept his value afloat. I mean, he had one massive slant to the house, which inflated his value a ton. But Zach Wilson looks awful. His offense looks awful. And I don't really see things getting much better for Wilson. Like you said, I don't think he's a wide receiver 2. I honestly see your point about Nico Collins ahead of him. I'm just not sure what to expect out of Stroud going forward. We'll see this week if he continues to pass the ball a ton. I think it's plausible, but we'll see if Robert Woods has a role in this offense to continue, and also Tank Dell. I just kind of want to see more if Stroud is going to be able to continue to be very efficient with how many attempts he's getting, and if Woods and Dell continue to average, 12 to 15 points in this offense. So I think next week, assuming Collins plays well, Stroud gets that passing volume as they play from behind, I could easily see him going above Garrett Wilson. So let's hop into some start sits. Is there anyone that pops out for you? I think for me, my number one start of the week is Mike Williams, because he's a little lower down on the list, but he is in a great game environment. It doesn't look like Austin Eckler is going to play this week. So Eckler gets his work from catching the ball, and that just means that Williams is going to have a target share through the roof. It's going to be a shootout. They play the Vikings. I think, especially in a game where a lot of points are scored, you should be chasing touchdown upside. And there's no one really better than that than Mike Williams. So what are your thoughts on him this week?
Yeah, I love Mike Williams this week. It's a great matchup. That game should be an absolute shootout, just a ton of throwing. Neither defense is any good, and both offenses are good. That's what you want for fantasy, right? You want bad defenses going against good offenses, and that's what we get. Plus, they're in a dome because they're in Minnesota, so you don't have to worry about weather or anything. It's a great Mike Williams week. I'll say I also really like kind of a similar player, Amari Cooper, this week. I know people are really worried about this Browns offense because Deshaun Watson has looked really bad still. But they get the Titans at home this week, and the Titans have just been horrible against wide receivers. Cooper's still the number one guy there, even with that groin injury. Didn't think he was going to play on Monday night, but he did. He still looked pretty good. Now he should be more healthy. I think Cooper's another guy, kind of right there with Mike Williams, like just too much up. These guys just have too much upside this week, to bench him, unless you have obviously really strong wide receivers. But yeah, Mike Williams, love him this week. Also love Amari Cooper.
Totally agree. Amari Cooper is one of my favorite players. This whole offseason, Deshaun Watson hasn't looked great, but he has even more upside if Watson is, it's hopefully should be around that time where if he does continue to get back to his former self, like he's progressing, although he hasn't really shown it, I think the time is now. Gives him even more upside. And he is that alpha wide receiver 1 in an offense that now that Chubb is gone as well, they're probably not going to run it as much. Ford is a good player, but he's obviously not Nick Chubb. So I think that just adds to his case even more. I notably don't have either DJ Moore or Tyler Lockett in my top 5 or 4, especially Lockett. Do you like Lockett? And do you think it's kind of ridiculous to not have him anywhere in this list this week?
I don't know if I'll go as far as to say ridiculous, but I do like Lockett because Lockett's one of those guys, like we saw last week. He's hard to keep out of your lineup because, you could be leaving 20 plus points, 30 plus, 40 plus points on your bench really any given week. So he's not a guy I'm okay if he's not in your top 24. He's not a guy I feel like you have to start him every week if you have really good options, but he's certainly a guy that's hard to keep out of your lineup on a weekly basis.
I agree with that. I'm just not a huge fan of Lockett. I expect that JSN is gonna overtake that role sooner than later. He's been looking pretty solid. And they do get the Panthers, which Bryce Young is now out. I think they should boat race them, and it really shouldn't cause them to throw the ball much anyways. So I don't mind him outside that top 24 range, but he's just on the outside looking in. He does have a ton of upside, so if you're looking in that case, then sure, go ahead and play him. But he's not a guy that I feel like has to be in that top 24. But let's just dive into some of the running backs real quick. I mean, the landscape is absolutely decimated.
Yeah.
This looks so much different. It feels so weird to have guys like Saquon, Eckler. I'm just not ranking any of them, or Nick Chubb anymore. So what do you think about these rankings? Anything that stands out to you? And, who do you like this week?
Well, I mean, I see you got Etienne at 3. I love Etienne this week. It's Houston. He's a great runner. I think, it's going to be a big Etienne week. He's one of those guys this week that I feel like if you have Travis Etienne, you have to get him in your lineup this week. I mean, Zach Moss just went for 1888 against them, and Zach Moss is pretty much an average running back. So Travis Etienne, I love where you ranked him. I don't know if I'd put him ahead of Bijan just because I like Bijan so much, but I'm not gonna knock him at 3. He's got massive potential this week.
100%. Yeah, I think it's very close to Bijan. I mean, my only concern for Bijan is Tank Bigsby hasn't looked like he's been a focal point of this offense at all. People are hyping him up all offseason. I think he's a talented player, but if he's going to get a role, it's going to be later on in the season. Again, they should absolutely blow out the Texans. The Texans are not good. They should be able to run the ball. And there's still a chance that Bijan is getting his touchdowns vultured by Tyler Algier, who didn't have a great week last week, but in week 1, we kind of saw how he was getting some of that goal line work. So it's just enough to, on a 50-50 call, I have Bijan slightly lower than him, but again, Bijan's a great player. He still deserves to be in that A tier of guys. One caveat I want to mention is I really liked A.J. Dillon, assuming Aaron Jones doesn't play, even though he had a rough week last week. If Aaron Jones doesn't play, are you in or out on Dillon this week?
I think at this point I have to be out. I've been on A.J. Dillon for last year and this year. I really thought like he would take a step forward. He would eat into Aaron Jones's usage, and like he really did. I mean, if you look at week 1, A.J. Dillon actually had more touches, but the difference is A.J. Dillon did nothing with his touches, and Aaron Jones did a lot with his touches. And then last week, in a pretty good spot, really let down. I'm just starting to wonder if A.J. Dillon isn't just an average running back at this point as far as, real life talent goes, which is crazy for me to say, but we have a pretty good sample size now where he hasn't necessarily looked great. So, I mean, look, in this running back landscape, if Aaron Jones is out, he's going to get the volume. It's not like there's 50 running backs that you feel good about this week. So, but I'm really getting to the point with A.J. Dillon where it's like, just not expecting much anymore.
Honestly, I'm pretty scared. I think he has the talent, though. He hasn't shown it, but I'm not willing to give up just yet, considering how bad some of these other running backs look right now and all the injuries. So he has the volume. He has the upside. And this offense looks pretty good. So if you're getting him as an RB2, I feel like you kind of have to be chasing that upside where there's not going to be a whole lot of running backs that are just going to go and win you your week anymore. But let's wrap up the running back section with just talking about Najee Harris. I don't have him in the top 24 at all. And people have been kind of asking me, like, are you really that low on Najee? Is he completely done? Where do you stand on Najee Harris? Because after seeing that game, and he does not look good. I'm out on Najee.
Yeah, this offense is just so bad. The offensive line is so bad. I think I'm like one of the few people who thinks Najee has actually looked pretty good this year. He's one of the leaders in yards after contact. He's got 3 runs of over 15 yards, which has always been the knock on Najee. Like, oh, he doesn't run for big runs. He's got 3 of them this year, and he's only had 16 carries. But they can't run the ball. The offensive line can't block. what do you like? They're not like, how many rush attempts do they have a game? Like 10 for the whole team, not just for Najee, for the whole team, and they can't run the ball. Their offense is awful. What we saw in the preseason, right, where everybody's getting excited about him, excited about Kenny Pickett, that was obviously just a mirage. He doesn't look like he's progressed. The offensive coordinator doesn't look like he's doing anything different. I mean, if there's one bright spot here, it might be George Pickens, but yeah, I'm just pretty much out on this offense entirely, except maybe George Pickens right now. We'll see what happens when Deontay comes back, but at least for right now, George Pickens looks like he at least has some upside, but this whole offense just looks terrible. I mean, might be the worst offense in the NFL right now. And saying might be like inaccurate. They probably are the worst offense in the NFL right now.
100%. I was never in on Najee Harris as a talent coming in this year, but it seemed like everyone was hating on him, and I didn't really understand why, because it looked like he was going to get that volume. I mean, Jaylen Warren looked all right, but keep in mind he played in very few games, so he's such a low sample size. He had under 100 attempts, so it's hard for people to compare him to Tony Pollard and Zeke. I thought that was ridiculous at the time, but it just looks like if they're going to be losing every game, they're willing to use Jaylen Warren more.
Yep.
If Najee Harris he's not an explosive runner, which is what scares me, because he's going to go in between those tackles and win when you're ahead. But the Steelers are bad, so they're never ahead. And he's not really being used to the extent as a pass catcher as he was his rookie year. They're willing to use Warren and throw him in because he can make plays in space. But yeah, I'm out on Najee. I mean, anything else you really want to add about these rankings? Because I'm just getting depressed talking about Najee Harris and all these running backs that are just decimated by injuries.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see anything here that jumps out at me as overly bad. I mean, or overly where I'm like, well, that's way like crazy. Like, no, they look pretty solid. I mean, yeah, it's I mean, maybe the only one would be like Swift. I don't know if Gainwell has practiced yet or not this week. I haven't seen. I'm usually on top of that. But if Gainwell doesn't play, then I'd probably bump Swift up because we know he's going to get all the work and it's a good O-line. But I mean, other than that, like, yeah, it's just like you said, it's such a crapshoot. You got like maybe 8 or 9 guys that you can feel good about every week, and then it's just pretty much a crapshoot out after that. You're playing matchups, you're hoping for touchdowns. It's brutal already.
100%. Yeah, if Swift is the lead back, Gainwell it looks like he probably might play right now. We'll see. If he doesn't play, then I have Swift a lot higher than this. But even if I think Swift should be featured a lot more, the Eagles have shown that they don't really make too much sense with what they do with running backs. If it was me, I would have Swift much higher than this because after seeing him dominate, I would give him the ball a ton. But I could also see the Eagles just decide to give Kenneth Gainwell 50% of the touches once again for what seems like no reason, besides that the fact that they have a great O-line and they think they can make anyone look like a superstar. But with that said, I mean, that's going to wrap it up. I don't want to take too much more of your time. Let everyone know where they can find your work. I know, obviously, you have the Fantasy Endgame. That's your main channel. Tell everyone where they can subscribe to you. Any other paid features you want to plug, or your own social media and all that, have at it. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Obviously, here on YouTube, Fantasy Endgame, that's our main channel. That's the best way. You can become a channel member if you want. We don't really have any like paid memberships at the moment, other than a channel member if you want. Just support the channel. Go check us out. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. That's all right too. It's all good. So appreciate you having me on, Steve. It was a blast. Always fun talking fantasy.
Yeah, again, thanks for coming on. Be sure to subscribe. They're putting out a ton of fantasy content for you in what looks like an already crazy season. But again, thanks so much for coming on. And that's going to wrap up this week's edition of the Fantasy Trading Room.